so glad you're here. And as we continue this series that we've been in, If We Build It, it's been this evolving conversation. It is tied into our pledge campaign because, of course, we are really metaphorically continuing to build a community here. But the reality is that we all build things in our lives. We all have things that we are called to, passions and purpose in our lives. And often these require a leap of faith to step out into the unknown. And so each week, we've broken down one of these words. We started with the if, right? What if? And may I be driven by that invitation rather than that expectation. And then the second week, we looked at that word we, right? That maybe to build at its best is when we build in community and in collaboration. And then last week, we really broke down what it means to build, right? That you are not just building physical things in your life, but more metaphorically, there are so many ways that you are building a life. And so naturally, we have made our way to the next word, to it. And if I'm being honest, that word it, when spoken by itself, has been ruined for me by Stephen King. And instead of, putting up a picture of a scary clown, what I want to do today is I want to just reclaim that word, it, because I believe that we all have an it, meaning we all have a sense of purpose, the thing that brings meaning. We all have something, and probably multiple things, that we feel that we are here on this planet to do and to offer the world. And the reality is, as dynamic beings, those things change over time. And so I didn't want to stand up here today and try to give an X, Y, and Z of how to find your it, because we are all so unique and we are all so complex and we are constantly changing. And frankly, a how-to of how to find your purpose has never really worked for me. And so instead, I simply want to have a conversation about how to stay present, how to remain attentive, how to keep our hearts sensitive to that which is already showing up in our lives. That I believe that our it, our purpose, it's already there. Right? The breadcrumbs are already there in your life. May we simply show up and pay attention. So I want to start with a little story, backtrack to something that happened to me a couple weeks ago. Olivia and I were coming home from a road trip to California, and we had to stop and charge our car. And so we had about 45 minutes to kill. And it worked out that where we were stopped was a shopping center with one of my favorite stores, a magical place. I don't know if you've heard. It's called Cost Plus World Market. It is an emporium of all things exotic and wonderful. And so I thought, well, this stopover is getting better already. But then we go into Cost Plus World Market and come to find out they are holding a daily scavenger hunt for the holidays. Find the golden nutcracker and you can win a $100 gift card. Now, this is not something that I have maybe publicly expressed very often, but when you put the word scavenger and hunt together, something comes alive in me, okay? I am ready, and really don't threaten me with a good time like that. And so I began to take this scavenger hunt very seriously. I began to search high and low for this golden nutcracker, opening cabinets, moving aside pillows. I probably made more work for people as I'm just like brushing stuff aside. But I would catch the eye of a fellow shopper, and for a moment, we would both pretend as though we weren't doing anything, right? Because neither of us wanted to be honest with each other of how earnestly we were taking the scavenger hunt. So we would catch each other's eye, and we would just pretend that we're just browsing, right? And then the minute they walked away, I'd go back to, and they would do the same. And eventually, I was having no luck, and so Olivia and I decided, okay, we better time to go. We should just give up this search, and maybe one day, right? Maybe next year, right? But as we were walking out, someone walked up to the register, and they had won the golden nutcracker. They had found it, and we were like, and then I looked closer, and I realized that the person who had found the golden nutcracker, what they had in their hand was not a golden nutcracker, but it was a piece of paper with a golden nutcracker on it. And I felt like I had been bait and switched, okay? That was not what I was looking for. And clearly I'm still upset about it 2 weeks later. But instead of speaking to the manager about my complaints, I decided to reflect a little bit on what I had learned. And one of the things that I had realized was that so often in life, we put all this effort into a search for something, a search for meaning, a search for purpose. And often, we're looking in the wrong places. We're looking for the wrong thing. And so maybe what we can do is to show up attentive, to show up with an open mind, so that we don't get lost along the way, so that we begin this journey with a sense of clarity and connection to ourself. And I think that one of the ways that we can really find our way in this is to get still, is to eliminate distractions. And meditating is not the only way that we can get still, right? It's really just when we stop reaching for a distraction or a comfort, right? When we stop trying to make sense of everything that's happening in our lives, because of course that is the working of the mind. But if we can drop into the heart and allow the real and raw emotions within us to arise, it's as though we have extended our emotional and spiritual antenna, right? To be more aware and conscious. And I believe that when we can do that, that's what's going to point us to our purpose and our it. And so what I really want to do, just to simplify this conversation, is ask 3 questions, 3 places that we might search within ourselves for where our purpose is already speaking to us. And the first question is, where's the joy? We got into this a little bit last week, but I really want to revisit it today. And the question that I have for you, when you think about your life, you think about what's happening in your life right now, what lights you up? Right? What makes you feel alive? What is something that when you do it, or when you go to that place, or when you're with that person, things feel right, even if the rest of the world feels wrong? This joy, this light can take different forms. It can be in the form of a person. It can be in the form of a place. It can be in the form of a passion or a pursuit or a hobby. But the encouragement I have for us today, friends, is may we protect this joy, because it is fragile and it is precious. The world is often going to tell you that your joy does not matter. And maybe you're like me, and sometimes you look out at the difficulties and turmoil that we currently face as a globe, and you might even ask this question of yourself, is my joy even allowed? Right? Is my joy worthwhile in a world that feels like it's falling apart? So often we talk ourselves out of our joy and we lose our connection to it. But friends, I believe it is worth preserving. I was hiking a couple of weeks ago, and a friend of mine were hiking. We passed this nature photographer who was all set up with a huge tripod and a massive zoom lens, and he was zoomed in into this bush, and he invited us to look through his viewfinder. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to see like some kind of crazy bird, or maybe even a mountain lion. This is awesome. And I look in the viewfinder, and what I see is just this tiny little seed pod hanging from the edge of this bush. And this man says, look at that seed pod. Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? And for a moment, I thought, yeah, but what about the economy? There's a lot going on right now. We can't be all focused on this seed pod. But then I realized, right, as his joy was starting to infect me, and I realized, wow, he has found a way to cut through all the noise and to hone in on something that brings him joy. And that is worth protecting. That is worth preserving. He was able to draw from nature itself and the ability to look at the details, look at the small things. When the world is shouting at us, look how big the problems are. And this guy was able to hone in on something small and precious. And it reminded me of how we can find joy from the littlest of things and from nature. And Pema Chodron says it really well. The earth seems to be beseeching us to connect with joy and discover our innermost essence. This is the best way that we can benefit others. This might be an interesting thought, that just by connecting with our own joy, we are somehow of a benefit to other people. And you might be wondering, well, how does this even work? I've had this curiosity for a while. And for me, the way I've worked it out is this. What if, when we connect with our joy, even if it's as small and seemingly inconsequential as a seed pod, when we connect with our joy, it makes us kinder, it makes us gentler, it makes us feel this sense of connection with ourselves, with the planet, with each other, and that flows out into every action we take. Friends, do we realize that we infuse every action with that deeper underlying core emotion and motivation, right? And so if you're fueled by anxiety, and if you're fueled by stress, and if you're fueled by obligation, it is experienced in how you show up in the world. And the same is true if you are fueled by joy or through gratitude, right? And I think that we want to experience a world where the people that we interact with, right, the people that we rely upon are fueled by joy. I'll give you an example. I do have a decent amount of tattoos, and they're covered up right now because it's cardigan weather, and I couldn't resist to wear a cardigan on the first proper day of, the good, cool season here in Tucson. So I'm covering up my tattoos, but I do have them, and the thing is that every time that I get a tattoo, it is always a relief when I get the sense that the artist really loves and is passionate about what they're doing, right? It's a good feeling. The opposite would be a little scary, right? Like imagine I sit down for a tattoo and, they turn the tattoo gun on and I hear the zzz and they're getting closer and closer to my arm. And then the tattoo artist looks at me and says, gosh, I just really hate my job. That would freak me out. I would run. Imagine you're going in for brain surgery, right? And they're about to put you down. They're like, count backwards from 10 down to 1. You're like, okay, here we go. And then the brain surgeon just looks at you and is like, I cannot wait for my shift to be over, right? Let's speed this up, right? That would freak you out a little bit, right? But you wouldn't be able to do anything at that point. But the question is, where in your life can you move from being infused with fear and infused with worry and infused with obligation, and can you move into infusing things with joy? And maybe the real question is, where is the joy already showing up? Where are the things of your life and the actions you take and the interactions you have already infused with joy, right? What friendship is naturally infused and overflowing with joy? That connection to that child or grandchild, that creative pursuit, right? And remember, it does not matter if you're any good or not. It's about the joy, right? Or that meal that you cook for that person. What's interesting is any of these things that we can name and whatever's showing up for you around your joy, that thing, that person, that location, that community is not the keeper of your joy. It does not hold your joy hostage. It simply is there to unlock the joy that is already inside of you. It's an important distinction to make, friends, that the true joy is within, and the thing that unlocks it is external. As Eckhart Tolle says, pleasure is always derived from something outside you, whereas joy arises from within. Right? It's your capacity to feel and experience your world. And so the question is, friends, what if joy was our antenna? And if we followed the joy, we moved in that direction, we kept building there, we kept investing there, and who can imagine what can flow from that? And frankly, we're going to need joy. We're going to need joy because joy is what fuels our resilience. When things get hard, right, as they will naturally and they are in our world, but joy is that fuel that keeps us going, right? And so protect it, preserve it. However, joy is not the only place inside of ourselves that we ought to look. Just as we want to know where the joy is, we also should ask, where's the ache? See, sometimes, friends, we aren't led by our joy. We are led by our heartbreak. Our heartbreak is what clues us into where the help is needed. Where is someone hurting? Right? Where is there a need? It unlocks our empathy. Think about this, this food bank project I've been bragging on that's happening in our community. The people who came forth and said, we want to support local food banks because of this great need that has opened up in our world. They were led by a heartbreak, by an ache for something that they saw, and they said, I cannot stand for this. I cannot see these people suffering and do nothing. Right? Heartbreak can be a wonderful compass if we allow it. Says Terry Tempest Williams, let your heartbreak be your guide. It will lead you to what you most need to know. It's going to be one of the most challenging things we do as human beings. See, so often we treat heartbreak as a defect, as a problem, as something to be fixed. But what if our capacity to feel that ache is our sensitivity, right? And if our sensitivity is really our greatest gift, it's our antenna to experience the world around us. Yet when we choose to turn away from our heartbreak, right, to dull our senses, we lose our ability to navigate this world in an emotional and spiritual capacity, right? Certainly, our heartbreak is not convenient, right? So often, we don't want to feel what's truly there. But imagine what life would be like if we couldn't feel at all. Like even physically, for example. There's a condition called congenital insensitivity to pain. And it's someone who is born without the capacity to feel pain. And for a brief moment, you might think, wow, are they some kind of superhero, right? But then you think about it and you realize this is actually an incredibly dangerous and unfortunate condition to have. And many people who have it have lower life expectancies. Because if you cannot feel pain, you are subject to all kinds of danger and injury and harm that could come to you by that lack of sensitivity. It's incredibly dangerous. But in the same way, when we choose to cut off our grief, right, to cut off our capacity to feel sadness or the ache, it is as though we are flying blind in this world, ignoring the reality that an essential part of being alive is to feel into that ache. And if we can accept that and embrace that, it may become our superpower, that we might be able to step into our capacity as healers. And Alan Watts has this great encouragement on how to be a healer. A healer is someone who seeks to be the light that they wished they'd had in their darkest moments. Friends, what if our capacity to heal is tied up in our ability to sit with the ache, to sit with the reality of our darkest moments, right? Not to ignore it, to push it to the margins, but to feel it. And I know that there are so many of us in this room who would think of ourselves as healers, right? And we talked about this a few months ago, wounded healers, because we heal from the very pain and ache that we have experienced in our lives. And so our capacity to benefit and serve the world is often tied up in our courage to feel into the ache. So just as joy is asking what lights you up, ache is asking what stirs your compassion, and maybe even what stirs your outrage. Think for a moment about the progress that we have experienced as a species over thousands and thousands of years. And I know right now, in our cultural climate, it doesn't feel like a time to be dwelling on the progress we have made. But I promise you, as a species, we have come a long, long, long way. And the reality is that so much of our progress has been driven by the ache, because it's been driven by the things that we looked at and we said, we have to put a stop to this, right? Or we looked at it and we said, we need to help these people. Think about the importance of opening ourselves up to the ache and preserving and protecting it as fragile and as precious as it is. But there is one more question that I want to ask today, and I invite you to ask with me, and that is, where's the curiosity? See, I believe whether we realize it or not, we are all driven by burning questions. Questions of joy, questions of ache, and probably questions that show up somewhere in between, in that liminal space. And friends, I believe that our courage, right, the ways that you have showed up in your life courageously, all the moments that you could say, I was courageous and I stepped out in faith and I took a risk, that those were all moments where your curiosity was greater than your fear. And so may we look to our curiosity as a guide. Just as Albert Einstein did, who said, I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. You might be out there and you'll be like, well, you were pretty smart, so that was helpful. But think about it. He's really saying that beneath all of the skills and knowledge that he developed, it was all undergirded by this core curiosity and engagement with his world. Right? And so he goes on to say the important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. Friends, our curiosity is so incredibly personal, and it's so unique to us. You are going to be very curious about the world in different ways than I am, and that's amazing. But something our curiosity has in common is that in many ways it's about being able to live in a state, in a space where we don't have the answers. It's not really about getting all the answers, because we all know we never truly will. It's about an engagement with life, a wonder with life, an awe, a sense of what would happen if I did this or I did that. And yet so often we choose to shut down our curiosity because it is not convenient. It's not convenient to live in a state of tension, a state where we don't have all the answers. It's not convenient to open ourselves up to a world of questions that isn't always clean, it isn't always composed, and we are certainly not in control. So what do we choose to do instead? We often judge our curiosity before it comes fully online. Right? Like you might be out there and you might be like, man, it'd be so fun to learn guitar. And then this voice comes in and says, well, you're not going to be any good, so don't bother. Or you might be out there and you might be like, oh, I really would love to start that business. And then a voice comes in and says, well, you're probably going to fail and everyone's going to laugh at you, so don't even try. And that's what we do. We second guess ourselves before our curiosity has a moment to breathe. We preemptively shut it down because we say, oh, it's not going to be worthwhile. It doesn't contribute, right? All of these discouraging words that come from the mind. But I believe, friends, that the what if questions that are showing up for you, the why questions, this is the language of your soul. And so I just invite you to really consider protecting and preserving your curiosity, which allows you to move into a world that doesn't have all of the perfect answers. And I love what Rilke, the great poet, had to say about this. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Friends, if we can stay open, if we can keep ourselves attentive to the nudgings of the soul, if we can stay with that which is unsolved, if we can stay with the questions, then we're going to find ourselves in moments and in situations, right? And even amidst the turmoil of our world, and yet we will be able to recognize our joy, and we will be able to recognize our ache, and we will be able to recognize our curiosity. And perhaps at that point, you might feel a call or a pull to take a step in a certain direction. And maybe that will turn into another step and another. And sooner or later, you will end up in places you could have never imagined. And maybe then you will start to get some answers, but they will not be answers in the language of the mind, but in the language of the heart and the soul. Friends, can we stay open to these three questions? These three questions that maybe seem simple, but they're also pretty complex if you think about it. Because they are not questions of the mind. They are questions of the heart. I was talking to someone yesterday at our fall feast event, and we were talking about how in many ways the distance between the head to the heart, though really, it looks to be just a few inches, but it can often take a lifetime to get from here to here. Are you with me? Has anyone felt this? Right? And sometimes almost the entirety of the spiritual journey can be just traveling from the head to the heart. Right? And so may we be led by these questions, which are questions of the heart. And often the only way to get there is to actually face the challenge and difficulty of life. See, I know that there are many of us in this room, right? Because we've had conversations and you're going through incredibly difficult times in your life. But there's something that happens where that difficulty and challenge strips us bare to where there's all that's left is clarity on the answer to these questions, right? That if nothing else, you have been stripped free of any distraction, and you know where the joy is. You know where the ache is. You know where the curiosity is. Friends, I know this because I know that in the hardest moments of my life, if nothing else was clear, I had clarity on the answers to these questions, right? In the language of the soul. And so, friends, our goal is not to figure out our it, to get it all perfectly figured out and all set in stone because we change and the world changes. Friends, I just ask you, would you stay open, right? Would you be willing to pay attention and keep your antenna sensitive, right? Trusting that if you do that, that the purpose you're looking for, it's going to find you. So I just want to give you a moment here. Just ask yourself in this moment, right, if you're willing, take a moment and ask yourself, where's the joy? Where's the ache? Where's the curiosity? And you could even speak to it, right? You could thank it. Thank you, joy, for all that you bring to my life. Thank you, ache. And I'm sorry, ache, for trying to shut you down, right? I'm sorry, curiosity, for judging you, trying to control you, trying to make sense of everything. And I'm going to commit to just staying open to listening what these three questions answer, even if it's not convenient or doesn't make sense. You might be asking, what does this have to do with the pledge campaign, right? Because this series is tied into that. But the reality is, friends, is that Aldea has always had an it. And that it has always been driven by the question of where's the joy, where's the ache, where's the curiosity. See, when we've had leadership changes, we've changed buildings, we've gone up and down and had all these different changes, but we've always been driven by these questions. We've always led with joy and ache and curiosity, right? To be a place where we can celebrate being human together, right? Where we can stand in solidarity with one another through the ache that so many of us have, perhaps from backgrounds of faith and spirituality and religion that left us in pain. And a curiosity of what could be the future of spiritual community? What could be the future of spirituality in this ever-changing world? And we want to be a place that can continue to be a space for you and I to have these questions, right? To live together and belong together with some unsolved questions of the heart. That is what we want to do tomorrow and next year and into the future. And so the pledge, it's another invitation of how you could invest in that if that's something that calls to you. Of course, we're always, growing our volunteer community here. That's another way that you can invest. But more than that, just simply by being here, by showing up with an open heart and presence, that is contributing so much to this community that we are building. And so, there's just gratitude from me for all of that. But I invite you, right, as you walk through these doors, as you leave this place today, tomorrow, next week, would you just have some conversations, maybe with others, or even just with yourself about these questions? Where's the joy? Where's the ache? And where's the curiosity?